Again, please be seated. We're about to start the second or last half of this day. We've had a lot of good panels up to this point, and we have a couple more. I hope everybody's still wide awake and listening intently. We're now going to talk about financing and impact. I think a lot of the panels have discussed ways to collaborate, the work that goes across the value chain, and now we talk about the importance of financing and the impact it'll have. So the panel on sanitation and inclusive financing, pumping finance into sanitation, will start now. And to the panel, could I please call on the stage Vedika Bandarkar from water.org, Divyang Waghela from Tata Trust, Nilima Tota from Dasra, and this panel is going to be moderated by Nirat Bhatnagar from Dahlberg. And again, with questions, please raise your hand so the people can come to you with the mics.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to kickstart this panel, which talks about the need for innovative finance for sanitation, both urban and rural sanitation. The day has been extremely exciting so far, and we won't go through the detail that's already been covered. I think we've got a great panel. We've got experience in microfinance and water credit, in how large foundations and trusts have started to experiment with innovative financial instruments and processes. We've got deep expertise in urban sanitation and how innovative financing has worked through development partners, multilaterals, and so on. The format that and I'll be moderating this, and we'll talk about what innovative finance means, what are the benefits, what are the needs for innovative finance in Indian sanitation, and very tangible sort of next steps, different categories of organizations who are there in the room. What could you do? How could you get involved in innovative financing? How should you, if you're thinking about starting a new fund or if you're starting off investing in this space, how should you think about these things, right? The format will be, I'll set the stage for what innovative finance really means, what are the 2 or 3 different levers that innovative finance has, and also how they might apply across the value chain. So just setting the context. Then we'll do 3 or 4 rounds of questions with the panelists where they'll share the experience. And finally, we'll have about 7 or 8 minutes of Q&A where we'll take questions. So let me set some context. India has a huge sanitation problem, which has different elements. There are policy elements, there are hardware elements, there are behavioral elements. And just given the scale of the country, it needs money. All of these things need money. The entire value chain, as it manifests in urban and rural India, is structurally the same value chain. You've got waste collection at toilets, then you've got storage, transport, treatment, reuse, value extraction. It pans out differently in urban India, rural India, in decentralized, centralized, but all of this needs money. There are different sources of money right now. Some of it is just grants, some of it is government money, subsidies, some of it is market money, where people pay for these services, some of it is development money, philanthropy money, right? But the numbers are really bleak. If you look at the gap assessments that have been done on the financing gap that exists in India, different studies, if you look at them, the numbers range from per person, if I were to look at the gap, assuming the Indian population of nearly 1.3 billion, the per person gap in sanitation financing has been estimated to be as large as 2,500 rupees or $40 per person, assuming a 5-person household. And to sort of contrast that with the numbers that we have, if you put together all the philanthropy money that's been unlocked by the new CSR bill, I mean, it comes to a very small fraction of that. It comes to about $2 per person, or $3 per person. If you look at even the government financing program, the SPM sort of budgets, it comes to about $2 per person per year. So there's a very large gap. So it needs innovative sort of financial instruments to solve different parts of this puzzle. And so let's begin with establishing certain definitions. What is innovative finance, right? Innovative finance are 3 things. Innovative finance comprises of 3 things. Innovative financial instruments, so new instruments, new channels of delivering those financial instruments, and new processes through which those instruments get delivered, either to end sort of users or to intermediaries or to institutions, right? and the reasons, and the different reasons why they're important. So we'll start off, the first question that I want to ask my fellow panelists is, when you think about your organization's mission, and we'll start with Vedika, how have you defined your mission, and given that your sort of core purpose and your strategy is really about providing finance to different pockets of sanitation, how do you define the problem canvas of sanitation, and what kind of instruments have you used to address specific pieces?
Okay, thank you. So as was mentioned, I represent water.org, and we have a pretty simple and clean mission, which is in our lifetimes, we should be able to help everyone in the world gain access to clean drinking water and access to sanitation. And we really work at the household level. We started about 25 years ago, and we started with direct philanthropy or direct assistance. And very soon we realized, just as you mentioned the numbers, Neerath, that there isn't enough philanthropy money in the world which can really solve this problem. So we need to make every rupee or every dollar of philanthropy money work. And we need to leverage every rupee or every dollar. We've been in India now for more than 10 years, and one of the other things which we realized was even at the base of the pyramid, people do want and can afford to pay as long as they are given access to services at affordable rates. So in the morning, somebody talked about how some of our partners charge high interest rates, and I'll come back to that. But the reason we started, what we started with was, we realized that at the base of the pyramid, women, more often than not, or families, were paying as high as 125% per annum for access to clean drinking water and sanitation. This was through the informal money lending system. And that really led us to start with this very simple product called Water Credit, where what we do is we give smart subsidies to NGOs or microfinance partners in India. And what these subsidies are meant for is market assessment, is for setting up a water and sanitation lending program. It could be for educating consumers about need for sanitation. It could be about baseline market surveys. It could be about hiring people. And then the microfinance partners, and one of the partners, in fact, is in the room today, Gramale, is then the microfinance partners lend for either water pipeline or for toilet construction or for rainwater harvesting. So just to give some numbers, we currently work with 17 partners in India. Our partners have made 650,000 loans in India. 95% of our borrowers are women. The loans have a 99% repayment rate. We have given smart subsidies of $10 million, which has lent in lending of $130 million by our partners, so about a 13-time multiple. And we have reached 2.6 million people in 12 states in India.
That's very helpful. Thanks very much for sharing that. Divang, if I can ask you, what has your organization's history been in funding sanitation programs, and how has your thinking about the nature of finance that's needed, how has that evolved over the years?
So the trust has been in this space since last 100 years, so established in 1919, and typically it has been actually providing the conventional kind of philanthropic funds to the individuals, non-profit organizations, and the community institutions. And in 1995, when we started working more on a strategic way, we realized that whatever the finite resources we have, we need to look at it more smart investment rather than giving away checks to the community institutions or the non-profit organizations. When we started the first program in 2002 on water and sanitation, we looked at more in terms of leveraging the government resources and then trying to have a multiplier impact. But again, the partnership with government is quite complex, and when we realized that it's important to make it a kind of a mainstream, the alternative financing mechanism, in 2012 we started the whole strategy towards looking at the alternative financing. And being one of the founding organization to promote the microfinance in the country. We had substantial amount of field base. We work in around 18 states and having a reach out of around 450 partner organizations who are directly or indirectly involved with the community microfinance status in terms of the self-help groups or federations. So we thought of actually if we can leverage those existing network of the partners and also the community institutions, then I think our outreach would be much faster looking at the scale of the problem, specifically on the water and sanitation. So when we started working in 2012, shifting our strategy on the inclusive financing, we started providing more in terms of, as Vedika mentioned, about smart subsidy. So rather than actually providing individual households loan, we tried providing money to the community institutions. So as a foundation, we can't take that money back. So we realized that this money can be rotated to the community institutions or the households over a period of like 24 months or 36 months. But I think the outreach has become 1:60, 1:6. So it means once we invest $1, I think it can rotate for within 2 years, it reach out to the 6 or 7 households, comparatively low than the other commercial microfinance institutions. But as a foundation, I think that was one of the very good learning for us. And now whatever the investment is happening, we are actually moving out towards the smart subsidy in inclusive financing to this. Second, one of the important aspects we realized that rather than supporting the programs, we need to actually facilitate and play a role of catalytic role to support the sector. So how you can actually support the informal sectors, promoting a social enterprising in the sanitation space, because sanitation is not a FMCG product, so the rate of return is comparatively low than others. So you need to actually look at how you take some of the risk of these entrepreneurs in the initial stage so they can be sustainable over a period of time, and then you look this as one of the mainstream market potential for reaching out to the more households, because our limitation is to reach out to some larger community institutions, but these social entrepreneurs have a larger, I think, the capacity as well as the outreach to reach out to the large number of communities. And I think that's one of the, I think, the challenge which we actually overcome over a period of last few years, and now we actually make it a more kind of a strategic investment in promoting this kind of informal sectors, and then making it more fair, formal, and in the mainstream, so that they can play a more instrumental role into achieving the larger objective of providing the safe drinking water and the sanitation services to the communities.
Thank you. Nilima, you've held a bunch of roles over the years, ranging from consulting with different kinds of organizations, seeing how government works really up close and personal, lots of multilaterals. How have you seen this conversation of financial instruments for different pieces of the value chain change, and what do you think are principles that seem to work well?
Thank you, Neerath. While we talk about the inclusive financing, it's really about enabling finance for the marginalized communities to be able to access sanitation products as well as services. So we're really looking at the entire value chain and across the life cycle of these processes. So the focus really is not just on the demand, but it's also on the supply chain. So it's really about catalyzing the markets, which can then make these services more affordable to these communities. And there is also a distinction between just providing access, mere access to sanitation, or are we providing access to improved sanitation? And Madhu from BMGF in the morning had brought up this point of safe sanitation. And this is backed by evidence with respect to the payback for every dollar that's invested in the sector. So for every dollar invested, just providing access, there is a good payback of $3 to $34. However, if there is an access provided to an improved sanitation, there is a payback of $5 to $60. So that's a big opportunity right there. And these inclusive financing really have to catalyze the markets in terms of being able to strengthen the operational environment for the service delivery, which make these services more affordable, and hence the upfront financing gap that's really a community needs to reach out for is reduced. And also Vedika and Divyang have talked about why the interest rates are so high, the operational cost of MFIs. So how can this inclusive financing or the smart monies that we are talking about really lend themselves to creating that environment for the MFIs so the operational costs can be brought down, and hence this inclusive financing can be really inclusive. So that would be the first point, Neerath, really.
Thanks. So the second question, or the second thought I have when I think about financial instruments that are needed for sanitation, would love to hear from the panelists what they think about whether we need different instruments for the capex cost in both urban and rural, and the OPEX cost, the O&M costs, or do you think we need blended sort of finance which covers both of these things? And what your thoughts on that are, and what experiences with those that is?
So I don't think by design, but this is how we've ended up. Most of our work has been, most of our partners' work has been rural so far. So of the 2.6 million people which I mentioned, we've reached 80% are rural, and another 7% is peri-urban. So our experience in urban is actually very limited. But, the point which Neelima also made earlier, I think it does come back to how can we reduce the cost of funding for our financing partners. And hence, they can in turn reduce the cost of their final product. And so smart subsidy is one way. What we did last year is we raised a fund, a small fund, $11 million from social impact investors in the US. And we are going to be deploying it this year as rupee debt, again, to our financing partners. And the idea would be that our financing partners get debt which is cheaper than otherwise they would have access to, which in turn makes them be able to lend at more affordable rates to the end consumers. We also worked hard with the RBI and the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation over 2 years, and got RBI, played some role in RBI, including household sanitation as a category in the priority sector lending. Again, the aim being that if banks put more money into the sector, the cost of funds comes down, and hence the cost of the final product to the end consumers comes down.
All right. Divyang, what about you? What have you seen? What are the different do you think CapEx and OPEX needs different kinds of money? In your experience, when you give a grant, or in this case loans, do you cover a certain time frame for the upfront cost and maintenance? Or?
So, yeah, for example, in water, we generally follow the user pay model. So once we actually do the capital investment, either through grants or even by leveraging from the government resources, we try that the 100% operation maintenance cost should be borne by the community itself, because one, the government doesn't have that kind of resources available for meeting those operation maintenance costs. And if there is no involvement of the community in terms of the user fee model, then there are higher chances that the slip back will be much higher in terms of getting the system defunct. So in that, we try to promote the user pay model for the water part. On sanitation, I think we need to look at in terms of if we really want to make the game-changing scenario in the achieving these targets in a shorter time, we work at both ways. In terms of we try to provide initial fundings to the community institution, but we also try to ensure that there is a funding on the government, whatever the subsidy available, should be effectively and efficiently reaching out to the communities. So we did some models in Gujarat, and now it has been replicated in 2 other states, in Andhra and Karnataka. So direct cash subsidy transfer is one of the models which we promoted, because when community microfinance institution work, the recovery rate comparatively is low. So if you want to make it faster, to achieve it more number of households, then you need to look at there is enough cash available, specifically for the poorest of the poor community. So then we also in backend work with the government to ensure that the money from the district administration reaches out to the households within 30 to 45 days through direct cash subsidy, bypassing in internal 2 or 3 channels. I think that has made a lot of changes because it has reinserted the faith into the system because there is the money available, and second is about there are some initial starting points. Someone took risk, but then there are followers who there is a kind of a multiplier effect which actually push them to go for the sanitation adoptions. So I think the CapEx investment is very, very critical because if there is money not available, I think no one is going to take that kind of a risk. And there is no, I think, assurance from the government or any assurance of any other agency to get that funding, even if after some point of time, I think the achievement would be comparatively low. So we try to actually work out in the both ways in terms of supporting both CapEx as well as a part of user pay model in the OpEx.
Nilima, you were talking about how a certain kind of financing could actually catalyze the development of products, sanitation products, that are not only better for users, but also cheaper to maintain in the long run. Can you, in your mind, how do you see, let's say, a market for that kind of financing working? And can you actually have social investing that catalyzes some of this product development?
Sure. So if you really look at the urban sanitation space, the landscape, so it's really the 3T model, right? So you have the tariffs, you have the taxes, and you have the transfers. So the tariffs is basically a user charge that's levied for the services provided. And then we have the taxes, which the government passes on as subsidies. And really the grant made available as softer interest rates. And the transfers from the multilateral or the bilateral agencies being passed on as concessional loans to the either the service providers or the end beneficiaries or the end users. So it's really a combination of various products and services, and as we move from centralized services to decentralized services, we're talking about on-site sanitation, so which involves a lot of operation and maintenance at the beneficiary level itself. So then there is an upfront financing not just for the capital expenditure, but also for the operational expenditure at a household level. So it's a blend of those, and the social impact investment can come in to even facilitate research and development of low-cost technologies, which can then be engaged by the local communities. And that's the difference it can make in terms of reducing the requirement at a household level.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll ask one last question to the panelists, and then we'll throw it open for questions. I think what's very interesting is how these instruments have come to be, how your strategy of, let's say, water credit or advocacy with the RBI. Do you if you had an aspiration of how the people in this room and the organizations were thinking about financing sanitation, what kind of institutional structures, what kind of almost financing labs, if you will, do you think are needed in the near future, 1 or 2 years, which would really reduce the transaction costs or friction of coming up with new instruments, trying out new instruments, maybe blended instruments, mixing different kinds of things, and seeing what works, what doesn't work, and then disseminating knowledge across the sector? What do you think would need to happen?
So I would say 2 or 3 things. One is just more knowledge sharing. So, you know, both of you talked about government subsidies, and I remember 3-4 weeks ago, I was at a similar event, and West Bengal, for example, mentioned the secretary there mentioned a very interesting thing which the state is doing. So in the morning, I think we talked about 12,000 rupees of subsidy per toilet in the rural areas. West Bengal has decided that they will give 10,000 rupees to the beneficiary directly after the toilet's constructed, but they'll keep 2,000 in balance, and they will give it to the community once certain milestones have been met, i.e. the community's ODF and some other milestones over a certain time frame. And I thought that was a very interesting way of making sure that the community stayed involved, and it became a collective responsibility rather than an individual responsibility. What was even more interesting to me was we had West Bengal there, and we had a bunch of other states, and the other states were not necessarily aware of this is what's being done. So I think the first thing I would just say is knowledge sharing, which is needed across the government, across financial institutions, across civil society, NGOs. I think the other ask I would have is, as corporates think about their CSR programs, and as the CSR programs evolve, please do think about how much each rupee can stretch, and how can you stretch every rupee. So, and think about sustainability. So direct grants is needed in the weakest section of the society, but probably not in all the sections, and you do need to think of sustainability and how can you make every rupee stretch.
Thank you. Divyang, what would your sort of wish list be almost for collaboration to get more innovative financing in the sector?
See, I think what we have been doing over the last 3 years, we actually tried to bring all like-minded foundations together. So we developed a quite strong consortium of few foundations who are coming together, trying to look at how we can actually align our objectives to those other objectives. So I think it's bringing together everyone, and then actually we can have a pool of resources, knowledge together, and then go for a common direction. I think it will really help to cater to the sector as a whole, rather than the cater to the small programs or reaching out to this small communities. So the collective action is very, very important, and I think foundation and the CSRs, if can come together with the common objectives, that will serve the purpose of achieving, the ODF by 2019.
Sure. Nilima, what would your answer be to that?
Yeah. Sorry. So just building on Vedika's and Divyang's point really. So it's really, we are talking about a stock exchange of ideas, innovations. So how do we build these innovative models, or even exchange as they are available within the market and learn from them? And really there's a huge gap on the supply chain side of it. So how can we bring in the CSR funds and tap into them to strengthen the supply side more, so that really eases the burden on the demand side as well? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Those are all the questions we had. Would love to sort of take questions from the audience now.
Yeah, hi. So I really like the discussion on inclusive finance and the important things being knowledge sharing, and to actually build some of the things that are, some of the important things that are missing right now from the picture. But I did not hear much discussion around technology and the role of technology in the whole space, because in BOP or in the underserved populations, like I have not heard much of fintech sort of R&D, whereas in the other space there is a lot of fintech R&D. So what's anyone's take? Anyone who's would like to answer?
So I would say actually it all goes down. There is use of fintech to bring down the cost of finance. So yeah, you're right, we didn't mention it, but it does play a huge role. I'll give you an example. In one of the states where we've recently started working, we are going to be working with the postal department. Essentially, as you know, probably postal department's converting to a payment bank, and to see again how can we bring either direct cash transfers or even cost of funding lower and lower, so that we can charge the consumers low. Yeah.
If I can just, I think that's a great question. In addition to getting more funding into the sector, I think fintech can actually reduce, can actually make certain business models really profitable. So if you look at urban sanitation, for instance, a lot of the urban sanitation revenue flows are unmonitored, and the way the contracting works with the government and private operators, they don't do it at scale because they can't make money. So actually at Dalberg, we're trying some proximity payment-based systems which can make payments at public toilets, etc., fairly transparent, and making sure all revenue is recognized. So there's a lot of potential for fintech. Great question.
Fabulous packages of financing available. By any stretch of the imagination, can enough money be put together where a government is a non-entity in this? It'll all be done with private funds. I think Bangladesh came close to have no subsidies. If there's enough demand, people are willing to pay. Shouldn't there be enough capital available?
Shouldn't there be enough capital available? I hope the answer is yes. I think we're not yet at that stage. So 3 things I would say. One, to achieve scale of the order which we all want to do to solve this problem, I think we do need to work with the government. I do think we need to keep bringing down our costs, whether it's through technology, whether it's, probably it's a combination, through social impact investors, solving the supply chain issue. And then maybe we don't need the subsidies anymore, but today it is absolutely true that many of the borrowers do need the subsidies in order to be able to afford the loan.
I think just to give you one example, as the RBI actually declared that the sanitation and water would be the priority sector lending. But there are very little, I think, the offtake of this kind of a capital what is available. So what we did actually, we did sign an MOU with the NABARD for around $200 million actually for multiple sectors. But we also try to look at how we can actually facilitate the initial risk investment with the NABARD, which gives a quite cheaper loan and to the community institutions, and now how the initial few percentage can be taken care of maybe for a period of year or so, because the amount of capital which is available huge in that, but I think there is no taker into it. So I think when we started working in that model, and I think now we could actually see that there is enough potential for this kind of a capital to be leveraged for the mainstream sanitation programs, which was not earlier. So I assume that there are some avenues available which need to be tapped in, and someone has to take or maybe support some initial risk investment for that. And I think maybe this is a quite good platform where this investment need to happen at some point of time.
Good afternoon. My name is Tenzin, a grantee of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We work on decentralized wastewater treatment systems. And Bangalore has 3,600 decentralized STP. It caters to the 10% of the Bangalore population, so meaning government hasn't spent a single rupee in that, neither in the capex nor in the opex. Similarly, in the fecal sludge management, this honeysuckle truck, the truck which empties the septic tank, thousands of them in this country. Now, these truck people plus those people who have built this decentralized system, we don't get any access to basic loan finance, forget about innovative financing. So the question is how to provide access to very normal, basic access to the financing. Thank you.
I think that's a great question. And the reason why many of these business models across the value chain don't get money is because of data paucity. Different kinds of money, investment needs data to make informed decisions, whether that's a viable investment or not. It kind of comes back to the knowledge question and the data sharing question. I think we desperately need more data around viability of different business models, around performance of different sort of projects. And if you can create a common platform, and that's something that philanthropic money is very well positioned to do, given the requirement, given the freedom, the agency that the people in the room have. I think if you can create platforms where you have data transparency, then you can actually unlock much, much more private money.
So to address your question, Stanzin, so as I said, the water and sanitation program of the World Bank looks to pumping in finance to catalyze the markets. So there's finance available to develop this social entrepreneurship to lend itself to the service delivery. So that's one way. And RBI revamping the priority sector lending, it's really going to unlock 40 to 50 billion US dollars. And there's been a study that was supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation way back in 2008, which talks about the requirement or the demand in the market being at US dollars 12 billion. So really there's the capital available. However, collaboration with the government is really required, as Vedika puts it, to achieve the scale, and also for the sustainability, and to also accord accountability to the government, which is very important given water and sanitation is the state mandate. Thank you.
All right, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for being a great audience. Thank you, panelists, for this discussion.